This is the story of a jumble trip that turned into a nightmare. A trip that started with excitement, laughter, and the thrill of adventure, but quickly spiraled into something none of us could have ever expected. Listen closely, because you need to understand how things went wrong right from the beginning. It all started when my friends and I decided to go on a jumble adventure. It wasn't just any jungle, it was a dense, unexplored area that not many people had dared to enter. My group consisted of 4 people: Samir, Aditi, Rohan, and myself. We were young, full of energy, and eager for a break from the regular routine of life. The idea of wandering through a jungle, surrounded by nature, was enough to make us excited. The plan was simple: enter the jungle, camp for a night, explore, and then return the next day. We started early in the morning, making our way to the jungle's edge. The air was fresh, the trees towering over us like ancient guardians of the forest. We were in awe of the beauty around us. The sunlight pierced through the thick branches above, casting playful shadows on the ground. We laughed, clicked photos, and talked about everything and anything. It was one of those carefree moments where the world felt perfect, and nothing could go wrong. We packed everything we might need: food, water, a small tent, a couple of torches, and even a knife, just in case. Though we didn't think much about it at the time, the knife was a bit of a safety precaution for the unknown. The air was thick with the scent of earth and plants, and the deeper we went into the jungle, the quieter it became. At first, we didn't notice it, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. It was like the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The deeper we went, the more the world around us seemed to change. The trees grew taller and closer together, blocking out the sun, and the air became thicker. The sounds of the jungle, once lively and filled with birds, began to fade away. We only heard the occasional rustle of leaves, the odd snap of a twig underfoot. At first, we told ourselves it was just the natural sound of the forest. But then things started to feel wrong. Samir was the first to speak up. "Guys, do you feel like someone's watching us?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. We all laughed at first, thinking it was just his imagination running wild. "It's just the jungle," I said, trying to keep things lighthearted. "You're probably just thinking too much." But the more I thought about it, the more I began to feel it too. There was a strange, oppressive silence surrounding us. No birds, no rustling leaves, no buzzing of insects, just silence. That was when we started to realize something wasn't right. We stopped walking, standing still for a moment. A chill ran down my spine. That's when Rowan pointed out something even stranger. "Look at that," he said, pointing to the sky. The weather was changing. The bright sunshine we had been enjoying earlier was now covered by dark, heavy clouds. The sky had turned an almost unnatural shade of gray. It was as if the jungle itself was turning against us. We decided to keep moving, but the farther we went, the more we felt like we were walking in circles. There were no landmarks, no signs of any path, just endless trees. The air grew thick with the feeling of something watching us, and the silence became even more oppressive. It wasn't just the lack of sound, it was the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. And then when we looked around, we realized we had no idea where we were anymore. We had strayed too far into the jungle. We were lost. With the sun now hiding behind dark clouds and the jungle growing colder, we set up camp quickly. But the fear in our hearts was already growing. It wasn't just the strange feeling of being watched or the odd silence. It was the way the jungle seemed to close in around us, the way the trees whispered secrets we didn't understand. As the darkness of night settled over the jungle, we realized that we were not alone. But by then, it was too late to turn back. After we set up camp, the weight of the growing fear began to settle over us like a thick fog. It wasn't just the feeling of being lost anymore, it was something deeper, more primal. The jungle around us had transformed from a beautiful adventure to a dark, unknown entity. There was no denying that something was wrong. We were not welcome here, and we could feel it with every nerve in our bodies. As night fell, we quickly zipped up the tent, our only shield from the growing dread. The air around us grew colder, and an eerie silence hung over the jungle. The usual sounds of wildlife were completely absent. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, no distant howls from the wild animals that usually roamed at night. There was only the sound of our breath and the occasional crackling of our small campfire. It was so quiet that it felt suffocating. We huddled together inside the tent, each of us trying to make sense of what was happening. Rowan, trying to be brave, kept talking about how everything was fine, that we were just overreacting, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Samir, too, was uneasy. He kept checking the surroundings with the flashlight, his hands shaking slightly. Aditi, normally the strongest of us, had fallen silent, her face pale in the glow of the firelight. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all scared. And then the first sound came. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft rustling, a slight movement of the branches in the distance. We all paused, listening intently. But it was too quiet to be normal. The wind wasn't blowing, and yet the leaves were moving. We glanced at each other, silently agreeing that something wasn't right. The sound stopped, and for a moment, the jungle returned to its unnatural silence. But then it came again, this time closer, that unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps dragging along the ground. We froze, straining our ears to listen. The steps were deliberate, as if someone, or something, was carefully making its way toward us. "It's just an animal," Samir whispered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Probably a bear or something. No big deal." But deep down, we knew it wasn't an animal. The footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. No animal moves like that. Suddenly, there was a sharp, loud bang, the sound of something hitting the side of the tent. We all jumped, our hearts racing. The tent shook slightly, and for a brief moment it felt like the world had stopped moving. We sat in stunned silence, eyes wide, not sure what to do. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky, but there was no answer. Just the distant sound of the jungle, as still and silent as ever. We unzipped the tent quickly, our flashlights slicing through the dark. We shined the light around us, looking for anything that might explain the noise. But there was nothing, just trees, darkness, and the unsettling stillness that had taken over the jungle. "I don't know," Aditi whispered, her voice barely audible. She was visibly trembling now. We all were. We locked the tent door tightly and huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. But there was no explanation. The night outside seemed to stretch on forever, and the footsteps continued. At first, they seemed distant, but with each passing minute, they grew closer. They circled our tent, slow, purposeful, as though whatever was out there was studying us. We tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it felt like the footsteps were right outside our tent, just inches away. We could hear them clearly now, heavy, uneven steps, something large, something deliberate. A sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, rattling the branches, and in that moment there was a loud thud, and something slammed against the side of the tent again, harder this time. The tent shook violently, and we screamed, terrified that whatever was outside was trying to break in. "Get the knife," Samir whispered urgently, his voice breaking. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the small knife from our bag, my fingers trembling as I held it. The weight of the moment crashed down on us all. We were trapped, helpless. Whatever was outside wanted us to know that we were not safe. Time seemed to drag on in that tense silence. The footsteps stopped, but the fear did not. We listened closely, waiting for any sign of movement, any noise that might tell us what was really out there. But the night continued on, dark, heavy, and silent, until we could no longer tell if we were hearing things or if the footsteps had really been there at all. We didn't sleep that night. The fear had already settled deep within us, and with every passing minute, it grew stronger. Every rustle of a leaf, every whisper of wind, felt like an omen. We stayed close together, hoping that morning would come soon, hoping that when the sun rose, the nightmare would be over. But none of us truly believed it. By morning, the fear from the night before hadn't gone away, it had only grown stronger. None of us had slept a wink, and we were all exhausted. Our nerves were shot. We were just too scared to even close our eyes, fearing that something might happen if we let our guard down. The jungle had felt like it was closing in on us, suffocating us, and it was hard to shake that feeling, even in the light of day. We quickly packed up our things, anxious to leave the campsite and find our way out of the jungle. The night had shown us just how dangerous the place was. We weren't safe. Whatever was out there was still watching us. We knew we had to move, but the question was where to? We were lost, and with the jungle as dense as it was, it felt like we could walk for days without finding a way out. As we began walking, we all stayed close, each of us looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking just out of view. The jungle was eerily quiet, with no sounds of birds or animals. Even the wind had stopped. It was as if the whole jungle had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. For what seemed like hours, we walked without any real direction. The trees around us looked identical, making it nearly impossible to figure out if we were heading in the right direction. Our minds were beginning to unravel with the stress. Rowan kept saying things like, "We'll find the way out," but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. Samir tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes, but even his humor couldn't cover up the tension in the air. Then, just when we thought we couldn't take it anymore, Aditi, who had been walking ahead of the group, called out to us in a shaky voice, "Guys, come here, you need to see this." We rushed to her side, and that's when we saw it. A tree with a strange mark carved into its trunk. It was hard to miss. A perfect red circle, with a straight line cutting right through the middle. The color was vivid, as if freshly painted, yet there was no trace of paint. It looked like it had been carved into the wood with precision, the mark too deliberate to be natural. A cold chill ran down my spine when I saw it. Something about that mark was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What is that?" Samir asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He took a cautious step toward the tree, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "It wasn't here before." Aditi nodded, looking as shaken as we felt. "It's almost like someone, or something, made it." We all gathered around the tree, staring at the mark in silence, and then something even more unsettling happened. We realized that the tree wasn't the only one with the mark. As we looked around, we saw that the same symbol was carved into almost every tree around us. It was like a trail, leading us deeper into the jungle. Every tree, every trunk, had the same exact mark, a red circle with a line through it. The marks were everywhere. My heart began to race. There was no way this could be a coincidence. Someone, or something, was marking these trees, and it felt like it was leading us somewhere. "It's a warning," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The thought was unsettling. We were being tracked. We were being hunted. Rowan, who had been more optimistic up until now, looked genuinely scared. "What do we do? Do we follow the marks?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "We can't just follow them. That's exactly what it wants us to do." But the marks seemed to pull us forward, almost like they were guiding us deeper into the jungle, beckoning us. Every direction we turned, we found another tree with the same symbol. There was no escape. It felt like we were walking in a circle, following the trail of marks, getting closer to something we couldn't even understand. Then, just as we were about to turn back, we heard the footsteps again. Slow, heavy, deliberate. But this time they weren't distant. They were right behind us, moving steadily, getting closer. We froze, the blood draining from our faces. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we spun around, flashlights aimed at the spot where the sound came from. But there was nothing, just darkness and trees. The jungle, once again, was silent. We turned back to the path of marked trees, our steps slow and uncertain now. Every part of me screamed to run, but we couldn't. We were already too deep. The marks on the trees were pulling us in. It was as if we were being led somewhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, we weren't going to like where it took us. By the time we had followed the trail of marks deeper into the jungle, we were all completely on edge. We had no idea where we were heading, but it felt like we had no choice but to keep moving forward. The marks on the trees were like silent instructions, pushing us to go further into the heart of the jungle, and as much as we wanted to turn around and run, something about the situation felt wrong. We knew we couldn't leave, not until we found a way out. We had been walking for hours and exhaustion was starting to take its toll. We hadn't stopped to rest. Every moment we spent standing still made the unease grow. The footsteps we kept hearing had stopped for a while, but the air was thick with the sense that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but all I saw were the tall trees and the swirling mist. The jungle seemed to close in on us as though the forest itself was alive, holding us captive. And then, out of nowhere, we saw it. A small, dilapidated hut appeared between the trees, almost hidden by the thick undergrowth. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Its wooden walls were half-rotted, covered with vines and moss, and the roof sagged to one side, barely hanging on. It was dark inside, the windows obscured by layers of dirt and plant growth. A faint smell of decay lingered in the air, and we hesitated, unsure of whether we should approach or keep moving. "What is that?" Samir whispered, his voice cracking as he pointed toward the structure. "Is that a house? It doesn't look like anyone's lived there for a long time." Aditi replied, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "But maybe it's a shelter. We should check it out." I didn't feel right about it. The hut was out of place, and everything about it screamed danger. But we had no other options. The jungle had already drained us physically and mentally, and if there was any chance of finding shelter, it seemed like we should take it. So we walked toward the hut, each step heavier than the last. We reached the door, which hung crookedly on its hinges. It creaked loudly as we pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The floor was covered in layers of dust, and the air inside smelled like mildew and rot. There was no sign of life. No furniture, no belongings, just the remnants of something long forgotten. We entered cautiously, shining our flashlights around the room. It was a small space with wooden beams overhead and cracked walls that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. There was a dusty old lamp on a table in the corner, its glass cracked but still intact. In the far corner, there was a pile of old papers, scattered on the floor. It looked yellowed with age, and we couldn't resist the urge to investigate. Samir knelt down, carefully picking up one of the papers. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it, revealing an old, faded photograph. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. The photo was black and white, and it showed 4 people. They were standing in front of a different hut, similar to the one we were in. They looked like us. The positions in the photo were almost identical to where we were standing now: Samir, Aditi, Rohan, and me. But there was something horribly wrong about the picture. The people in the photo weren't smiling. They weren't even looking at the camera. Their faces were twisted in expressions of pure terror, and their hands were tied behind their backs. They were crying, their eyes wide with fear. "What the hell?" I murmured, taking the photo from Samir's shaking hands. "This doesn't make any sense. Who are these people?" Before anyone could answer, Rowan suddenly stood up, his face pale. "Guys, look at this." He pointed to the walls of the hut. We turned our flashlights toward where he was looking, and that's when we saw it. Carved into the wood of the walls were the same marks we had seen on the trees, the red circle with the line through it. The symbols were everywhere, etched into the walls, the beams, even the floor. There was no mistaking it. Whoever had lived here had been part of whatever dark force was behind the marks in the jungle. A shiver ran down my spine. "This place is wrong," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel it in my bones. The air was thick with something I couldn't describe, something cold and sinister that seemed to be closing in on us. Suddenly, there was a loud creak from the roof. It sounded like something heavy was moving above us. We froze, the hairs on the back of our necks standing up. Then, a deep, guttural growl echoed from somewhere outside the hut. It was close, too close. "Get out!" Aditi screamed. She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut on its own with a violent bang. We were trapped. The jungle outside had gone completely silent, and the growl from outside had stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then we heard it, the footsteps. Heavy, slow. And this time they were inside the hut. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. We were stuck, trapped in a place that felt like it was alive, breathing, waiting for us to make a move. The jungle had lured us here, and now it seemed like we were never going to leave. The air inside the hut grew thick with fear, and our breaths came out in shallow, quick bursts. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, echoed through the hut, but we couldn't see anything. We couldn't hear anything except for the sound of our own panicked breathing. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine as the footsteps came closer. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. The door, still slammed shut behind us, felt like a prison. There was no way out, The windows were too small and covered in grime, making it impossible to see what was happening outside. We were trapped, and I felt like the walls of the hut were closing in on us, like it was all a part of some dark design. Whatever was outside, or whatever was in the hut with us, was playing with us, toying with us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling as I gripped the handle of the old rusty knife that Samir had found earlier. It felt like the only thing that could protect us, even though it seemed useless in the face of whatever this thing was. No answer. Only the sound of the footsteps, now moving in circles around the hut, getting closer. It was as if something was walking just outside the walls, its presence growing heavier and more oppressive with every step. "Stay quiet," Samir whispered urgently, his hand on my arm. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "We have to wait for the right moment. We can't just run. It's too dangerous." Rowan's eyes darted around the room. "What if we barricade ourselves in?" he suggested. "Maybe we can keep it out." But before anyone could respond, the air shifted. A chill swept through the hut, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped by 10 degrees. The footsteps outside paused, and then there was a low, raspy voice, so quiet at first that I wasn't sure I had heard it. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was a whisper, but it felt like it was inside my head, vibrating through every fiber of my being. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded inhuman, like it came from deep within the jungle itself, from the shadows that were now closing in on us. I felt my legs go weak beneath me, and I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. The others weren't much better off. Aditi was clutching my arm, her nails digging into my skin as if she were trying to hold herself together. Samir and Rowan stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Then, as if the jungle itself had heard our thoughts, a loud crash came from the roof. The hut trembled, the wooden beams creaking under the strain. Something was coming down from above, something large and heavy. I looked up, fear rising like a wave in my chest. Out of nowhere, a massive, shadowy figure lunged down from the ceiling, crashing to the floor with a deafening thud. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Its skin was a dark, sickly green, covered in gnarled, scaly patches, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, piercing red. Its limbs were long and twisted, like the branches of a tree, and its claws scraped the floor as it stood up, hissing and growling. The creature stood in front of us, its eyes locked onto ours. Its gaze was cold and empty, like it had seen hundreds of people just like us, and had taken them all. I felt the urge to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in place by the creature's gaze. "We're going to die here," Rowan muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But just as the creature took a step forward, as if ready to strike, the air shifted again. A loud roar came from outside the hut, louder than anything we had heard before. It was an animal's roar, but it was unlike anything we had ever heard. The ground beneath us shook with the force of the sound, and the creature hesitated. It turned its head toward the noise, its expression shifting as if it was no longer focused on us. The distraction was enough. My mind snapped back into action, and I grabbed Aditi's arm, pulling her toward the door. "Now," I shouted, my voice hoarse from fear. Samir and Rohan were right behind us as we sprinted toward the door. The creature, momentarily distracted by the roar, didn't seem to notice us running until we were already halfway out of the hut. The moment we crossed the threshold, I could feel the change in the air. It was like we had stepped into another world. The jungle outside was alive with movement, but not the peaceful sounds we had once known. There was a low, rumbling growl from the trees, and something large moved just beyond our vision. The creature wasn't far behind us. We could hear its heavy steps crashing through the undergrowth as it pursued us. The fear surged through me, propelling me forward. We ran as fast as we could, not daring to look back, not knowing what we would see. The path through the jungle was overgrown and twisted, but I could barely register the pain in my legs as we pushed forward, desperate for an escape. But the jungle was not kind to us. It seemed to reach out, grabbing at our legs, tripping us, trying to slow us down. The underbrush tore at our clothes and skin, and every sound made us jump. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we saw it, the clearing, the edge of the jungle. It was barely visible, but we pushed forward, our bodies screaming for rest, our minds focused solely on one thing: escape. The creature's growl was growing louder again, but we reached the clearing, and for the first time we dared to look back. The hut was far behind us now, lost in the dark maze of trees, and the creature, it stopped at the edge of the jungle. It didn't follow us. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, shaking from head to toe. We were safe, at least for now. The jungle had tried to claim us, but we had escaped. I didn't know how we had made it, but we had. And I knew one thing for sure. I would never ever go near that jungle again. Whatever lived there, whatever haunted those trees, it was not something that any of us should ever have encountered.